G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. We're going to listen to a little bit of a radio political comedy analysis called First Dog on the Moon.
This is Radio on the Moon, where it's time for Guide to Modern Living, with your host, Walkley Award-winning cartoonist, First Dog on the Moon. Hello, Patriots. What a week. Julia Eileen Gillard. She was born at the bottom of a coal mine in Wales. Her parents came to Australia by boat in 1966 and were detained indefinitely. Oh no, hang on, that was someone else. Julia Eileen Gillard. She went on to become Prime Minister Julia Eileen Gillard, and then just this week to become former Prime Minister Julia Eileen Gillard, just like that. In the beginning, we all hoped that she would be our Bodicean saviour, Australia's avenging Ranger angel, wife, sister, mother of the nation, the knitting redeemer who would crochet her way into our hearts, and she even had a cavoodle. But it wasn't to be. She was Australia's 27th Prime Minister and the first woman to ever... Oh, God, blah, blah, blah. Aren't we sick of hearing about how she was a woman? I mean, seriously, if she wasn't waving her cleavage around like some sort of floozy, she was forgetting to have children and having a boyfriend who was a hairdresser. What's wrong with this country? How could this nation throw up such a misshapen democratic disaster onto the sandy beach of our political life? Is it because we're a nation of drongos, dills, dickheads and dropkicks? That woman. Stop pretending, Australia. You don't like politicians and you don't like women. You don't like foreigners or native animals either, unless you can fondle them in the zoo or shoot at them from the back of a ute, and that goes for the native animals as well. Jelia might not have been brought down because she had norks and a lady garden instead of wedding tackle, but it certainly helped. Sure, she made some terrible blues, but who hasn't? You don't see me getting the chop just because I can't draw people. I won a Walkley. No, we set a higher standard for chicks and can't wait for them to balls it up, so to speak. But I digress. She really was the engineer of her own demise, a product of the Labor Party machine, a willing participant in and victim of the dumbing down of Australian political life. She was a brazen blues stocking Emily Lister, a strident harpy, setting her heart against the nation intent on luring democracy to a grim demise. But who isn't these days? Did it really matter that she was a woman? Well, if it doesn't, why on earth do we keep talking about it? Because it does. But seriously, I heard a story on Twitter, and look, I know normally when anyone starts a sentence like that, you should just punch them and run away, but you can't hit me. I'm on the radio, so I heard this story on Twitter. There's this dad, and he's watching his two daughters. They're 3 and 5 years old, and they're playing Prime Minister. The littlest one was being Julia, so she got to wear the prime ministerial cardigan. It's not all blood and damnation. There is hope here. There is a dim light in the darkness. Julia lost a shoe and the confidence of the electorate. In many ways, her failure is ours. We are lessened that we so keenly cast her down, and we are greater for the time she chose to honour this nation with her service, even though she buggered it up a bit. And that's okay. She's Australian. She's one of us. It's what we do. We bugger things up. Thank you, Julia Eileen Gillard. The nation doesn't salute you, but it should. And eventually, it probably will. This has been First Dog on the Moon's Guide to Modern Living on Radio on the Moon. You're welcome.
Well, there you go. That's the short talk humorous version of the downfall of Julia. I don't know what you thought of her, but I'd had enough. As far as I'm concerned, she never actually won a contested election in her life because she was parachuted into a safe Labor blue ribbon seat. She was a loyal Labor right faction backroom party hack numbers cruncher. Before that, she was a lawyer in a union. Before that, she was a law student at university playing politics. She had ambitions to work her way up the corporate ladder, and get to the top. Well, in a sense she did. She got to be Prime Minister of Australia. And because Australians don't, as a general rule, seem to understand the fact that when we vote federally, we do not vote for who the Prime Minister is going to be. We're not like America, we don't have a presidential campaign. We're only voting for who's going to be our local Member of Parliament, and any party of Members of Parliament who can command a majority on the floor, they get to form government, and their party chooses their party's leader, and that's automatically the Prime Minister. The funny part is that the polls for the past 2 years have been suggesting Australia was not interested in having a federal election to choose between Julia Gillard and Tony Abbott. Australians have been very interested in wanting to have a federal election to choose between Kevin Rudd and Malcolm Turnbull. But the Liberal Party had knifed Malcolm Turnbull to put Tony Abbott in. So therefore we had this mismatched bunch of dingbats pretending to be representing Australia with, great disgruntlement on the part of the population. So, Julia's gone, but bear in mind, she represented the Labor Right faction, the Parliamentary Federal Labor Right faction, and that's controlled by the New South Wales Labor Right faction. And the New South Wales Labor Right faction has been controlled by Eddie Obeid. So when you look at the idea that Julia Gillard partly toppled Kevin Rudd because the mining industry was afraid of the super profits tax he was going to hit them with, because at the time commodity prices were high and they were making super big profits. Julia Gillard came onto the scene because she reckoned Kevin Rudd had made a mess of it, and he made a mess of selling the idea of it. But Julia managed to pass a mining tax which, since it's been instituted, hasn't generated any revenue. Julia Gillard's run by the right faction of the Labor Party. The right faction of the Labor Party is run by Eddie Obeid, and Eddie Obeid was sewing together a $100 million corrupt coal mining deal. Why does it surprise anybody that Eddie Obeid's prime muppet would come up with a mining tax that doesn't tax the miners? Is it that difficult? I thought it's not rocket science. But anyway, apart from that, Bob Carr was the Premier of New South Wales when Eddie Obeid was parachuted from being I think he was President of the Labor Party, or he was Secretary Treasurer, some functionary in the New South Wales Labor Party. He was parachuted into a safe Labor Senate seat when Bob Carr was the Premier. Everybody was wondering why Bob Carr got out of New South Wales politics so terribly suddenly that it took the Liberal opposition by such a great surprise they lost a leader over it, because, he just couldn't help himself in his cups but make reference to Bob Carr having an Asian mail-order bride who he could send home now that he was no longer Premier. Brogden actually tried to commit suicide over that one. But yeah, Bob Carr got out of politics when he realised just how corrupt Eddie Obeid was. And Bob Carr has been brought back into politics because Julia Gillard was having a hard time dealing with Kevin Rudd and Tony Abbott, and he got drafted as Australia's Foreign Minister. And he's, standing at the at the side of Kevin Rudd at the moment. So how strongly the right faction of the Australian Labor Party still thinks it's got its grip on the Federal Parliamentary Party is, anybody's guess, but I don't think it's over yet. I've no idea how Kevin Rudd's going to go with his idea of postponing the election so he can bed himself in as Prime Minister. But already he's indicated that he's going to do something silly with the carbon tax, but who knows if it becomes a market-based thing and America and China do what their governments have been saying that they're interested in, which is actually legislating to reduce carbon emissions, then we're going to have to follow along. We can't keep exporting coal. At the moment, Australia has 1/20 of a % of the whole world's population. So a lot of people in Australia really don't give a shit about global warming and greenhouse gas emissions because they figure 1/20th of 1%, what does it matter what they do? What they're not paying attention to is if you look at the share of the carbon emissions that Australia contributes in the coal that we dig out and sell and the gas that we suck up and bottle and sell, we're 4.5% of the planet's total carbon emissions. Because they couldn't be burning the coal in China if we didn't bloody sell it to them, or in the power stations of Thailand, or wherever it is that the smog's causing the acid rain that's killing the forests. Yeah, we're a big part of the problem. And the Liberal Party and the Labor Party and the National Party, they don't seem to be able to get their head around the fact that carbon emissions must be reduced, and you can't continue to commission more coal mines and more coal-fired power stations and more ports and more railways to export more coal in a world that is moving away from coal. 80% of the coal that exists in the world is going to have to stay in the ground. It can't be regarded as an asset. And that means that all of the shareholders of the Liberal Party and the National Party and the Labor Party have done their dough. However much money they've got invested in coal shares, it's lost money. So my desperate suggestion to the voters of Australia who haven't welded themselves onto one position or another already is the Liberal Party's got no idea what to do, the Labor Party's got no idea what to do, the National Party's got no idea what to do. These are the people who brought us the problems. The Greens have been right about every issue that mattered for the last 50 odd years. There were Greenies protesting against the Snowy River hydro scheme because they said it was going to make a mess of 2 river systems and it wouldn't make any net power. And it doesn't. The Snowy hydro scheme is a pumped storage battery so that they can keep the brown coal-fired power stations in Victoria, which have to heat and bake their coal before they can burn it. Therefore they can't change the throttle inside of 24 hours to make an adjustment. They're allowed to keep going full throttle 24 hours a day, and any time the people connected to the grid are not using electricity, they put it into an electric motor with a water pump and they pump water uphill. They do that all night. And in the morning, when everybody turns on their toaster and their radio and their microwave and the heat bank in the bathroom so that they don't have to be cold while they're drying themselves off, they run the water back downhill and they put it through a turbine and a generator. That's what the Snowy hydro scheme is, pumped storage. It's not generating new electricity because not enough rain falls because we cut down too many trees and the rainfall dropped. So, Kevin Rudd's in again. He's been given his Prime Ministership back. Vote Green. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.